It was just past midnight when I heard the first knock. Not a polite knock, not the kind you hear from a neighbor who forgot to borrow sugar, but a loud, pounding thud 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 that rattled my front door. I was already on edge because of the HOA. 4 months, their president, a woman named Cynthia, had been waging war against me. Her reason? I refused to remove my American flag from the front porch. She claimed it violated neighborhood aesthetics, but I knew better. She thrived on control, and I was one of the few who stood up to her. I grabbed my robe, peeked through the peephole, and froze. 2 men in police uniforms stood on my porch. Their stance was rigid, their faces shadowed by the porch light. One held a clipboard, the other rested his hand on what looked like a holster. "Open up." "Police," the taller one barked. "Police? At my door at midnight?" My instincts flared. Something felt wrong. Their uniforms didn't look right. The patches were faded, the badges too shiny, almost like they came from a costume store. And their patrol car? Nowhere to be seen. I opened the door halfway, keeping the chain locked. "What's this about?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. The man with the clipboard smirked. "We have a warrant for your arrest. HOA complaints. Failure to comply with neighborhood regulations." I almost laughed. A warrant? For an HOA violation? That's not how the law works. But I didn't laugh, because these men weren't real officers. They were imposters. And if Cynthia was behind this, she'd crossed a line she could never come back from. I leaned against the doorframe, playing along. "A warrant, huh? You mind showing me?" The clipboard guy shoved a wrinkled piece of paper toward the peephole. It wasn't a warrant, it was a printed HOA notice with "violation" in bold letters. My heart pounded, but I kept my face unreadable. "That's interesting," I said slowly, "because I'm the chief of police in this county. And I don't recall authorizing any fake warrants tonight." The imposters stiffened. Their eyes darted to each other, panic flashing across their faces. Before they could react, I unchained the door, flung it open, and stepped onto the porch, towering over them. "Do you have any idea what kind of crime you've just committed?" "Impersonating an officer. Attempted unlawful arrest. Breaking and entering attempt. That's federal time." They stumbled backward, suddenly unsure of themselves. The taller one tried to recover. "We're just doing our job. The HOA doesn't make laws. I do." My voice was sharp, commanding, the same tone I used when breaking up bar fights or talking down criminals. The shorter one bolted, sprinting down the street into the shadows. The tall one hesitated, then cursed under his breath and ran after him. I didn't chase them. Not yet. Instead, I stepped back inside, locked the door, and grabbed my phone. My deputies needed to know about this immediately. But more than that, Cynthia and her HOA cronies needed to understand that this war they'd started wasn't just neighborhood drama anymore. They'd brought it into my world now, the world of law, order, and consequences. And I was going to show them exactly what happens when you try to arrest the chief of police with fake officers. By the time the sun rose the next morning, I had already reviewed my security camera footage at least 5 times. Every detail was clear. The 2 imposters standing on my porch, one flashing that ridiculous clipboard, the other resting his hand on a cheap holster. Their fake badge numbers were visible when they leaned forward, and the audio captured every word of their bogus warrant. It wasn't just a prank. It was an organized attempt to intimidate me. And I had a pretty good idea who was behind it. Cynthia. Cynthia was the HOA president, the kind of person who thrived on control. If someone painted their shutters a slightly different shade of beige, she'd be at their door with a citation. If a neighbor parked too close to the sidewalk, she'd fine them before they even had a chance to move the car. Her hunger for power was insatiable, and I had humiliated her more than once by standing my ground. I wasn't about to let last night slide. The HOA board meeting was scheduled for 9 that morning in the community center, and by the time I arrived, the parking lot was already half full. Retirees with coffee mugs, young couples with strollers, and a few familiar troublemakers were filing inside. The room buzzed with chatter, but conversations dipped when I walked in. Cynthia was at the front table, gavel in hand, grinning like she owned the place. "Ah, Chief," she said sweetly, her voice dripping with mock respect. "So glad you could join us. I hope everything is peaceful at your house these days." A few people chuckled, though most avoided my eyes. I took a seat near the middle, folded my arms, and waited. The meeting started with the usual nonsense: garden regulations, noise complaints, and a lengthy debate about whether someone's bird feeder was attracting undesirable wildlife. Cynthia thrived on this chaos, flipping through papers, barking at neighbors, reveling in the power she thought she held. Finally, she turned toward me. "Now, Chief, I understand you had a rather unusual evening?" Her smirk widened. I leaned forward, my voice carrying across the room. "Unusual? That's one way to put it. I had two men dressed as police officers pounding on my door at midnight, waving fake warrants. They claimed they were sent because of HOA complaints." The room went silent. A murmur rippled through the neighbors. Cynthia laughed, actually laughed. "Oh, come now. Fake police? That sounds a bit dramatic, don't you think? Maybe you had a dream. Or maybe," she tapped her gavel on the table, "someone doesn't like how you've been ignoring the rules." My jaw tightened. She wanted to paint me as paranoid. But I wasn't about to play her game. I pulled a small tablet from my bag, tapped the screen, and turned it so everyone could see. The video played on loop, two men in ill-fitting uniforms demanding I open the door, waving their ridiculous clipboard, one of them shouting that I was under arrest. Gasps filled the room. One older man muttered, "Good Lord, that's my grandson's Halloween costume from last year." Cynthia's smile faltered for the first time. I let the footage play twice, then shut it off. This isn't a dream. It isn't paranoia. This is evidence. Someone sent those men to my home, and it doesn't take a detective to guess who. I let my eyes lock on Cynthia. Impersonating an officer is a felony. Conspiracy to intimidate a resident? That's prison time. Cynthia's face flushed red, but she forced another laugh. "Chief, really? You're accusing me? That's absurd. I run this HOA with integrity. If you're having delusions, perhaps you need a vacation." The board members fidgeted uncomfortably. Some of the neighbors exchanged uneasy glances. A few whispered to each other, clearly rattled. I stood, towering over the crowd. Here's the truth. I don't care if someone wants to fine me for not trimming my hedges or repainting my mailbox. That's petty. But when you bring crime into this neighborhood, when you send criminals to my house pretending to be officers, that's where this stops. And I promise you it will stop. For the first time, Cynthia didn't have a snappy comeback. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she gripped her gavel so tightly her knuckles turned white. I scanned the room, letting my words sink in. I will be pressing charges. And I suggest anyone else who's been harassed by this board come forward. Because if this is how our HOA operates, through threats and intimidation, then it's about to be dismantled. The tension was electric. Some neighbors nodded vigorously, relieved that someone had finally stood up to her. Others looked terrified, as if afraid Cynthia would retaliate against them next. Cynthia slammed her gavel. "Meeting adjourned," she snapped, rising so quickly her chair tipped backward. She stormed out of the room without another word, her heels clicking furiously against the floor. The room erupted in whispers and nervous chatter. A few neighbors approached me, thanking me quietly. One elderly woman admitted her garden had been vandalized after she refused to pay an arbitrary weed fine. Another man confessed that anonymous letters had threatened his family if he didn't repaint his house. Piece by piece, the truth was unraveling. Cynthia's empire wasn't built on rules, it was built on fear. And now, the cracks were showing. As I walked back to my car, I knew one thing: Cynthia wouldn't back down. She wasn't the type to surrender. If anything, my public confrontation had only painted a bigger target on my back. But I wasn't afraid. Because while Cynthia had her petty fines and fake authority, I had the law on my side. And the next time she came after me, I'd be ready. The following days were quiet, too quiet. After the explosive HOA meeting, Cynthia disappeared from public view. Normally, she paraded around the neighborhood like a queen inspecting her kingdom, clipboard in hand, barking at residents about weeds, fences, or misplaced recycling bins. But Not a single sighting. But silence in Cynthia's world wasn't peace. It was strategy. By the third night, I noticed the first sign. My mailbox, pried open, the lock mangled. Someone had stolen my letters. That same night, my neighbor across the street, an elderly Vietnam veteran named Carl, found his driveway spray painted with the words "Rule Breaker" in thick red letters. Carl knocked on my door, trembling with anger. "This never happened before you called her out," he muttered. "She's sending her dogs after us now." I believed him. The next morning, as I left for work, I noticed something wedged under my windshield wiper. A note, written in blocky letters with a red marker. "Quit before it gets worse." I turned the paper over, looking for fingerprints, smudges, anything useful, but it was clean. Too clean. Whoever left it knew what they were doing. Cynthia was escalating. That night, I reviewed the security cameras again. Around 2 a.m., the footage showed two masked figures creeping onto my lawn. One carried a can of spray paint. The other had what looked like a crowbar. They slashed at my hedges, ripped out a section of my garden fencing, and spray-painted "criminal" across my garage door before fleeing. They weren't teenagers pulling a prank. They moved with purpose, like they were on assignment. I called in a favor from the precinct and had the forensics team swing by discreetly the next morning. They dusted for prints, pulled a paint sample, and bagged the note. The younger officers looked uneasy. "Chief," one of them muttered, "this is personal. You sure you don't want us to bring in the local task force?" I shook my head. "Not yet. I want to see how deep this rabbit hole goes." Because I knew Cynthia. She wasn't just trying to scare me into quitting. She was testing me, probing for weakness. If I blinked now, she'd double down. By the end of the week, the harassment spread. Carl's back porch was egged. The Thompsons down the street received 3 bogus fines in one day for unapproved curtains. And the Millers, new parents with a 3-month-old, woke up to find their car tires slashed. Fear was spreading, and that's exactly what Cynthia wanted. But what she didn't realize was that fear works both ways. The more she terrorized the neighborhood, the more her mask of control slipped. People began whispering. Suspicion turned into quiet rebellion. One evening, I hosted a gathering in my backyard. A dozen neighbors showed up, some clutching coffee mugs, others nervously glancing around as though Cynthia's spies might be lurking in the bushes. Carl spoke first, his voice gruff. "She thinks she can run this neighborhood like a dictatorship. But if the chief here is willing to fight, I'll back him." The Millers nodded. "We moved here for peace and safety. Instead, we're prisoners in our own home." I looked around the circle, letting the silence stretch. Cynthia crossed a line the moment she sent those imposters to my door. And she crossed it again when she started targeting the rest of you. We're not just dealing with HOA pettiness anymore. This is criminal. The question is, are we willing to push back? A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. Some were hesitant, but most were fed up. The tide was shifting. Later that night, as I was closing my blinds, I saw headlights sweep across my driveway. A black SUV idled at the curb, engine running. The driver sat in the shadows, watching my house. I stepped outside, arms folded, making sure the porch light illuminated my badge. The SUV peeled away instantly. No plates. Tinted windows. Classic intimidation. I felt a rush of adrenaline, but also clarity. Cynthia wasn't just pulling HOA tricks anymore. She was operating like a small-time crime boss, complete with henchmen, threats, and surveillance. And she had just made her biggest mistake, treating me like one of her frightened residents. Because I wasn't just any homeowner. I was the chief of police. The next morning, I filed an official internal report. I documented everything: video evidence, vandalism, the SUV, the note, the escalation of attacks on neighbors. I didn't name Cynthia directly, not yet. Instead, I framed it as organized criminal harassment within the HOA leadership. Once the paperwork was filed, it was only a matter of time before an official investigation launched. But I knew Cynthia. She'd catch wind of it. And when she realized the law was closing in, she'd strike harder. That night, as I lay in bed, a thought gnawed at me. What's her endgame? She already had control over the neighborhood. Fines, threats, citations, she ruled by fear. So why risk felony charges with fake cops and criminal vandalism? Then it hit me. She wasn't trying to control me. She was trying to break me. To remove me entirely. And if my instincts were right, her next move wouldn't just involve paint or scare tactics. She was going to try to destroy me completely. And she was running out of time to do it. 2 days after filing the internal report, the tension in the neighborhood reached a breaking point. Residents whispered behind closed doors, glancing over their shoulders whenever Cynthia's gray sedan rolled by. Her absence from public view had ended. Now she was back, louder and bolder than ever. That morning, I stepped outside to grab the newspaper and saw Cynthia standing across the street. Clipboard in one hand, phone in the other, she was speaking loudly enough for me to hear. Yes, officer, he's dangerous. Yes, he threatened me. I fear for my safety. Please, hurry. Her eyes locked on mine, a thin smirk curling across her lips. She was staging a scene, then. I walked back inside, calm on the surface, but my mind churned. This wasn't just posturing. She was setting something up. That evening it happened. I had just returned from the precinct and was unloading groceries from my trunk when 2 police cruisers pulled up in front of my house. Except, something was off. The sirens weren't on. The decals on the sides were crooked, almost like stickers slapped on at the last minute. 4 men stepped out, uniforms wrinkled, belts missing key gear, and one even wearing sneakers instead of regulation boots. They approached quickly, trying to look authoritative. Sir, the tallest one barked, you're under arrest for harassment and assault against your HOA president. I raised an eyebrow. Really? Which department are you with? Local PD, he snapped. I chuckled, shaking my head. Funny. I am the local PD. The chief, in fact. And I don't recall hiring any of you. Their faces faltered. One shifted nervously. Another gripped his baton tighter. The tall one tried to recover. Don't play games. You're coming with us. I took a deliberate step forward, my voice firm. Gentlemen, impersonating an officer is a felony. You've got about 10 seconds before this entire block is swarming with real units. They hesitated, but then Cynthia appeared from behind her car, waving her arms dramatically. There he is. Arrest him. He's a menace to this neighborhood. The fake cops looked at each other, then back at me. I saw the panic rising in their eyes. They weren't professionals. They were thugs in borrowed uniforms. And now they realized they had been set up to fail. I slowly reached for my radio. Dispatch, this is Chief. I've got 4 individuals impersonating officers at my residence. Roll backup. The moment they heard the words, the thugs bolted. They sprinted back to their cars, doors slamming, engines roaring as they peeled out of the cul-de-sac. Cynthia screamed after them, her voice cracking with rage. No. Get back here. Arrest him. He's dangerous. But they were gone. Within minutes, real squad cars pulled up, lights flashing, sirens wailing. Neighbors poured out of their homes, drawn by the chaos. Carl leaned on his cane, shaking his head. She's finally lost it. The officers questioned Cynthia, who was still shrieking, her hair disheveled, mascara running down her face. He threatened me. He's corrupt. He's abusing his power, she cried, pointing at me with wild eyes. But the officers weren't buying it. Not after seeing the shoddy uniforms, the fake cruisers, the panicked escape. I gave them the security footage from my cameras, which captured every detail. When they tried to question Cynthia further, she clammed up, crossing her arms and glaring at me with venom. You think you've won, she hissed. But you don't know who you're messing with. That night, the neighborhood buzzed with talk of the incident. Some residents laughed, others worried. For the first time, Cynthia's iron grip on the HOA looked shaky. But I wasn't celebrating. Because if she was desperate enough to hire fake cops to arrest me, then she wasn't finished. She was just getting reckless. And reckless people were dangerous. The following day, a thick envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with bold, typed words. Step down or your career ends. Attached was a USB drive. Against my better judgment, I plugged it into a secure, isolated laptop at the precinct. The drive contained dozens of fabricated documents, fake misconduct reports, doctored photos of me taking envelopes of cash, even falsified emails suggesting I'd covered up crimes for friends. It was a smear campaign, sloppy, but dangerous enough to raise eyebrows if it spread. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Cynthia wasn't just playing games anymore. She was trying to destroy me from the inside out. But what she didn't understand was that I'd dealt with bigger threats than her. Crooked politicians, real crime bosses, even cartel fronts. And every single one of them had underestimated me the same way she was. This wasn't just about my reputation anymore. It was about the integrity of the entire community. So I decided to set a trap of my own. That weekend, I hosted another neighborhood gathering. This time, I kept it casual: barbecue, drinks, music. Cynthia wasn't invited, of course, but I made sure word reached her anyway. As neighbors mingled in my backyard, laughing and venting about their latest run-ins with her, I noticed the faint glow of a phone camera from across the street. Cynthia was watching, recording, looking for leverage. That's exactly what I wanted, because hidden among my guests were two plainclothes detectives, wired and ready. If Cynthia tried anything, slander, threats, bribery, it would all be captured, admissible in court. Sure enough, halfway through the evening, Cynthia stormed up the driveway. Clipboard clutched to her chest, eyes blazing, she shouted loud enough for the whole block to hear. "This party is an illegal gathering. You're all in violation of HOA policy, and every single one of you will be fined." The crowd booed. Some laughed. But then she made her fatal mistake. Pointing at me, she snarled, "You won't be laughing when everyone knows what you really are. You think you're the law? I own the law." The detectives exchanged a glance, recording every word. And in that moment, I knew my trap had worked. Cynthia had finally shown the world who she really was. And soon she'd have to answer for it. The recording of Cynthia's outburst spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. Within hours, someone had uploaded it to a private Facebook group for local residents. By the next morning, the clip had over 1,000 views, shared again and again with captions like "HOA President Loses It" and "Power Trip Gone Wrong." For years, Cynthia had ruled through fear, threatening fines, citations, and lawsuits. But now, people were laughing at her. Her authority had cracks, and everyone could see it. Still, a cornered snake is at its most dangerous. The very next day, the HOA board convened an emergency meeting. I knew Cynthia had called it, desperate to regain control. Several neighbors begged me to attend, and though I usually stayed out of their HOA politics, this time I agreed. When I arrived at the community center, the air was thick with tension. Half the room was filled with residents, arms crossed, glaring at Cynthia. The other half, her loyalists, sat stiff and uneasy, clearly aware of the storm brewing. Cynthia banged her gavel on the table, trying to command order. "This meeting is to address the escalating misconduct of one John Matthews," she announced, pointing at me with dramatic flair. "He has threatened residents, obstructed HOA operations, and brought disrepute to our community." Murmurs filled the room. A few scoffs. A couple of chuckles. I rose slowly, hands in my pockets. "With all due respect, Madam President, you called fake officers to my home. I have the footage. You've made threats, screamed in public, and now you're fabricating charges." Gasps rippled through the crowd. One board member shifted uncomfortably. Cynthia's face reddened. "Lies. All lies." She slammed her fist on the table. "He is manipulating all of you. He thinks he's above the law because he wears a badge. But I..." Before she could finish, one of the plainclothes detectives I'd invited to the barbecue stepped forward. He held up a small recorder. "Actually," he said, "we have direct audio evidence of you admitting to manipulating HOA power for personal control. Would you like me to play it?" The room went silent. Cynthia's eyes darted wildly. Her lips trembled, but no words came out. For the first time, she looked cornered. Truly cornered. The board voted that evening to suspend her presidency, pending investigation. It wasn't a full removal, but it was the beginning of her downfall. Of course, Cynthia didn't take it quietly. She doubled down. Letters appeared on people's doors overnight, claiming new fines: $500 for unapproved porch decorations, $1,000 for unauthorized gatherings, even $250 for parking too close to your own mailbox. Residents were furious. Instead of paying, they began documenting everything: photos, videos, timestamps. A small rebellion was forming, and I was helping organize it. A week later, I hosted a neighborhood meeting at the community center, this time not sanctioned by the HOA, but by the residents themselves. Dozens showed up, including Carl with his cane, mothers with strollers, retirees, and young couples. "We're tired of the bullying," one woman said, clutching a stack of letters Cynthia had shoved into her mailbox. "I've paid nearly $3,000 in fines this year, over ridiculous things. My flower pots, my mailbox paint, even the way my kid's bike was parked." Another man raised his hand. "She had my car towed. Said it violated HOA policy. But I checked the bylaws. Nothing about street parking. Nothing. She just made it up." Every story painted the same picture: abuse of power, intimidation, fraud. I stood up at the front. Cynthia has broken state laws. She's impersonated authority, falsified documents, and used her position for personal gain. We have more than enough evidence to bring this to court. But we need to do it together. A class action. The crowd erupted with agreement. People nodded, clapped, even shouted. For the first time, the community wasn't afraid. They were angry and united. The pressure began to suffocate Cynthia. She stopped driving her car, fearing she'd be followed. Neighbors reported seeing her peeking through curtains at night, scribbling notes furiously on her clipboard, as though she was still building her case against us. But paranoia wasn't enough to save her. Within 2 weeks, she received a formal subpoena. Her reaction was explosive. She marched down my driveway, screaming at the top of her lungs. "You think you've won, Chief?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "This neighborhood is mine. I built it. I own it." I didn't even respond. I just shut the door in her face while she pounded on it with her fists. Then came the real blow. During discovery, investigators uncovered financial records showing Cynthia had been siphoning HOA funds into her personal account for years. Tens of thousands of dollars meant for community maintenance had been funneled into consulting fees and administrative costs. In reality, they'd paid for her vacations, designer clothes, and a luxury kitchen remodel. When the news broke, the neighborhood exploded. Carl called me laughing so hard he could barely breathe. "She used HOA money to install marble countertops? Oh, she's cooked. She's cooked." Residents who had once defended her now turned their backs completely. Some demanded refunds. Others demanded prison time. And the board, desperate to save face, voted unanimously to strip her of her title. Effective immediately, Cynthia was no longer HOA president. But it wasn't enough for her. She wasn't going quietly. That night, my doorbell rang at midnight. When I opened it, Cynthia stood there, eyes bloodshot, clipboard gone, hands trembling. She looked less like a tyrant and more like a woman on the edge of collapse. "You don't understand," she whispered hoarsely. "This isn't just about me. There are people above me. People who won't let this go." Her words sent a chill down my spine. Because for the first time, I realized Cynthia might not be acting alone. Maybe this wasn't just HOA corruption. Maybe it was something bigger. And if that was true, then the fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Cynthia's late-night warning echoed in my head long after I closed the door. "There are people above me. People who won't let this go." At first, I brushed it off as desperation. Cynthia was a cornered tyrant, and cornered tyrants say anything. But deep down, I couldn't shake the unease. The next week confirmed it. One morning, as I headed to work, I noticed a black SUV parked at the end of the cul-de-sac. Tinted windows, engine running, no plates. It didn't move for hours. The following day, it was back. Different vehicle, same behavior. I wasn't paranoid. I'd been in law enforcement too long not to recognize surveillance. That night, Carl knocked on my door, cane tapping nervously. "John, I don't know what's happening, but A man came by asking about you. Said he was an HOA compliance inspector. Didn't look official to me. Dark suit. Cold eyes. I told him to get lost. The pieces started falling into place. Cynthia wasn't lying. She was just a pawn. Someone bigger was pulling the strings. I called a meeting with the core neighbors, Carl, the young couple across the street, the single mom with the strollers. We gathered in my living room, blinds drawn. Cynthia's downfall exposed something larger, I explained. Her fake fines and harassment were bad enough, but now I believe outside interests are involved. We're talking real estate developers. Maybe even organized groups that profit off foreclosures. Gasps went around the room. Wait, the young mom said, are you saying they wanted us to default on fines so they could seize our homes? I nodded grimly. That's exactly what I'm saying. And Cynthia was their puppet. The following day, I got my proof. A colleague at the department slipped me a file, financial ties between the HOA and a shadowy LLC that bought foreclosed homes in bulk. The LLC's registered agent? None other than Cynthia's cousin. Millions of dollars were flowing through shell accounts. This wasn't just neighborhood politics. It was fraud. On a massive scale. I brought the evidence to the next board meeting. By now, Cynthia was suspended, but she still showed up, wild-eyed, clutching papers like lifelines. You can't do this, she screamed when she saw the folder in my hand. You don't know who you're messing with. Oh, I know, I replied calmly, setting the evidence on the table. And so will the Attorney General by tomorrow morning. The room went dead silent. The board members leaned forward, eyes wide. Residents whispered furiously. Cynthia's last defenses were crumbling. She lunged at me, trying to grab the folder. You'll regret this. You'll all regret this. 2 detectives I'd brought in stepped forward, stopping her cold. The legal hammer fell hard. Within weeks, Cynthia was indicted, not just for fraud and impersonation, but for conspiracy and embezzlement. Several of her higher-ups were also arrested, including the cousin running the LLC. The HOA was dissolved under court order. A trustee took over the finances. For the first time in years, residents breathed free air. No more ridiculous fines. No more late-night threats. No more clipboard tyranny. Carl sat on his porch with a cigar one evening, chuckling. Never thought I'd see the day this place was peaceful again. You did it, John. But I shook my head. We did it. She only had power because people were afraid. Once you all stood up, it was over. The final nail in the coffin came months later, during Cynthia's trial. On the stand, she broke down, admitting everything, how she was pressured by developers, how she falsified citations, how she used HOA funds to keep her power. But when the judge asked her why she went so far, she gave an answer none of us expected. Because for once in my life, people listened to me. I mattered. I was important. It was pathetic and heartbreaking. But it didn't save her. She was sentenced to 10 years. Life in the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. Kids played in the streets again. Gardens bloomed without fear of fines. The community center was reopened for barbecues and card games. People no longer whispered when they saw me. They smiled, waved, sometimes stopped to chat. We weren't just neighbors anymore. We were a community. One evening, as the sun set golden over the cul-de-sac, Carl raised a toast at our block party. To John Matthews, he said proudly, the chief who showed us how to take our neighborhood back. Cheers erupted. Glasses clinked. For the first time, it felt like home. But even as I laughed with them, a part of me stayed cautious. Because if Cynthia was right, if there really were bigger players, then we had won the battle. But the war against corruption? That fight was far from over. And I was ready for it.